When I moved to Greenville, Ohio, it felt like stepping into another era. Life here was slower, simpler, and friendlier than the bustling chaos of Chicago, where I had spent most of my adult years. The town's charming main street, dotted with mom-and-pop shops and a classic diner named Gracie's Grill, made me feel like I was part of an old postcard. I was then, and starting over wasn't just a choice, it was a necessity. After a messy breakup and burnout from running my own business, I needed a change. In Greenville, I found a modest craftsman-style house that fit my budget and took a job as a mechanic at Maxwell's Auto Shop, the oldest garage in town. It didn't take long to settle into the community. Greenville was a mix of locals who had lived there for generations and newcomers like me. Each had their own quirks and stories. I joined softball games at the local park, spent mornings chatting with retirees at Betty's Coffee Corner, and quickly became a regular at the Friday Farmers Market. One of the most fascinating people I met was Walter Burke, a year-old farmer who had lived in Greenville his entire life. Walter was known for his booming laugh, sharp wit, and stories about the good old days. He owned a sprawling, acre farm on the outskirts of town, complete with a barn and an orchard. Walter had 3 grown kids, all of whom had moved to bigger cities. After years of running the farm alone, he decided it was time to retire. He sold the property to a family from New York, wealthy city folks looking for a country escape. When Walter finally left for Florida, his absence left a strange void in the town. The once bustling farm became eerily quiet, its silence sparking endless rumors among the locals. The farm didn't stay vacant for long. It was sold to the Carson family, rumored to be millionaires from Manhattan. The Carsons' arrival was the talk of Greenville for weeks. Everyone speculated about their wealth and why they'd chosen such a small town. Their property included a classic white farmhouse, a barn that had seen better days, and several outbuildings scattered across rolling green fields. For a while, I didn't have much contact with them. I was busy at Maxwell's, fixing everything from pickup trucks to lawnmowers, and my evenings were spent catching up on life in my cozy new home. That changed one rainy evening. It was late, and the rain was coming down in sheets. I was driving home after picking up groceries when I saw a sleek black Audi pulled over on the side of the road. Steam billowed from the hood, and a woman in her early 30s sat in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the wheel. I pulled over and tapped on her window. She jumped, her eyes wide with panic. "Are you okay?" I asked loudly, trying to be heard over the rain. She shook her head, but didn't roll the window down. Clearly, she didn't trust me. I stepped back, holding up my hands to show I wasn't a threat. "Look," I shouted, "your car isn't going anywhere like this. Let me call someone for you." She hesitated, then nodded. I climbed the hill nearby to get a cell signal and called Deputy Aaron Mills, Greenville's no-nonsense, but good-hearted sheriff's deputy. "Why haven't you helped her already?" Aaron asked, his tone half-joking. "She won't even open the door." I retorted, "Get back down there and try again." "She's probably just scared out of her mind," he said, grumbling. I trudged back through the rain and tried again. "Hey, I'm Adam Grant," I said through the glass. "I work at Maxwell's Auto Shop. I can help, but I'll need to pop the hood." After what felt like an eternity, she cracked the window and muttered, "My name's Rachel Carson. I don't know much about cars." "It's okay," I said gently. "You're not alone in that." Eventually, she relented, letting me open the hood. A quick inspection revealed a ruptured radiator hose. I explained the issue to her and suggested towing the car back to Maxwell's for repairs. "No," she said quickly, panic flashing in her eyes. "I can't leave it here. My husband will be furious." That caught me off guard. Why would he be mad? "It's not like you planned for this to happen." She didn't answer, instead fiddling nervously with the bracelet on her wrist. By this point, Aaron had arrived in his patrol car. He stepped out, shook his head at the weather, and approached Rachel's window. His easygoing demeanor seemed to calm her down a bit. "Ma'am, it's just a busted hose," he said. "Adam's the best mechanic in town. Let him take care of it." Rachel hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Aaron helped her into his patrol car to get her out of the rain while I hooked up her Audi to my truck for towing. By the time we reached the Carson property, the rain had turned into a light drizzle, though the night was still bitterly cold. Rachel directed me to park the Audi near the barn, her voice quiet and unsure. The farmhouse itself was dark, with no lights visible in the windows. It happens out here sometimes, but I didn't think it'd be this bad. Do you have a generator? I asked, recalling the one Walter Burke had installed years ago. She shook her head. I think there's one in the shed, but I've never used it. With a flashlight from my truck, I made my way to the shed and found the generator buried under a tarp. After checking the fuel level and giving it a quick once-over, I managed to get it running. The farmhouse flickered to life, the warm glow of lights spilling out into the yard. When I returned, Rachel was standing on the porch, visibly relieved. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." "It's no trouble," I replied. "You might want to grab some extra diesel for next time. The generator's got a few hours left, but that's about it." She nodded, still looking a little lost. Feeling a pang of sympathy, I handed her my card. "This has my number and the shop's address. I'll get your card fixed first thing tomorrow. If you need anything in the meantime, just give me a call." She tucked the card into her jacket pocket, murmured another thank you, and watched as I drove away. Later that evening, I called Emily, my wife, to let her know I'd be late. "Where the hell have you been?" She snapped as soon as she picked up. I sighed, already bracing for the inevitable argument. There was a woman stranded on the road. Her car overheated, and I had to help. "You couldn't have called earlier," she said, her tone sharp. "Do you know how worried I was?" "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. It was pouring rain, and I was focused on getting her out of there safely. She's new in town, part of that family that bought the Burke farm. "Oh, great," Emily said bitterly. "Rich city people who probably think we're all bumpkins." "Did she at least offer to pay you for your trouble?" "She was scared and alone in the middle of nowhere," I replied. Money wasn't exactly her priority. Emily muttered something under her breath, but I let it go. By the time I got home, she had already gone to bed, leaving a cold plate of dinner on the counter with a sticky note that read, "Microwave it yourself." I ate quickly, showered, and collapsed into bed, too tired to dwell on the tension between us. The next day, I repaired Rachel's car by mid-afternoon. The issue had been straightforward, just a replacement hose and a top-off of antifreeze. Around lunchtime, a tall man in his early strode into the shop. He was sharply dressed in a tailored coat and polished shoes that didn't match the dusty streets of Greenville. "Hi, I'm Mark Carson," he said, extending a hand. "My wife mentioned you helped her out last night. I wanted to arrange the tow for her car." I smiled and shook his hand. "Nice to meet you, Mark. The car's already here, and it's fixed. It just needed a new hose." Mark raised an eyebrow. "That was fast. How much do I owe you?" "Bucks," I said. He blinked, clearly surprised. "That's it? Don't you charge for labor?" I shook my head. "Not for something simple like this. Consider it part of being neighborly." Mark looked puzzled but nodded. "Well, thank you. I appreciate it." Later that evening, Mark returned with Rachel to pick up the car. She looked more composed than the night before, though her demeanor was still reserved. As they left, I noticed Rachel glance back at me briefly, a mix of gratitude and something unspoken in her expression. At home, Emily was in a sour mood again, this time complaining about needing a new car herself. "I can't keep driving this old Hyundai while people like the Carsons cruise around in Audis," she said, crossing her arms. "Your car's fine," I said, trying to keep the peace. "It's barely 3 years old and has less than miles on it." "It's embarrassing, Adam," she shot back. "Everyone else is moving up in the world, and we're stuck in the same place." I took a deep breath, knowing this argument would only spiral. "If you want a new car so badly, buy one," I said evenly. Her face flushed with anger, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I sighed, rubbing my temples. This wasn't the life I had envisioned when we moved here. Emily's fixation on status and appearances had been a growing wedge between us, and I was starting to wonder how much longer we could keep pretending everything was fine. The cracks in our marriage were becoming impossible to ignore. The days following the Carsons' visit passed quietly, though Rachel's expression stayed with me longer than I expected. Work kept me busy, and I threw myself into it, avoiding the growing tension at home. Emily's moods had become unpredictable, and every conversation seemed to spiral into an argument. A week later, I saw Mark again, this time at the local diner, Gracie's Grill. I was grabbing lunch when he walked in, scanning the room like a man out of place. When he spotted me, his face lit up and he headed over. Adam, he greeted, extending a hand. Mind if I join you? I motioned to the empty seat across from me. Sure. What brings you to Gracie's? Wanted to get a feel for the local spots, he said, sitting down. Rachel's been raving about how helpful you were. I wanted to thank you again. No thanks needed, I said, shrugging. It's what neighbors do. We chatted for a while, mostly about Greenville. Mark asked about the town's history, the community, and local businesses. He seemed genuinely curious, though there was an undercurrent of something else, restlessness, maybe. Moving here's been an adjustment, he admitted, swirling the coffee in his mug. We thought we'd find peace and simplicity, but Rachel's struggling to settle in. She's always been more of a city person. Greenville grows on you, I replied. But it's not for everyone. Mark nodded thoughtfully. I just want her to be happy. This move was supposed to be a fresh start for us. The way he said it struck a chord with me. I'd come to Greenville for a fresh start too, but not all new beginnings turned out as planned. After Mark left, I found myself thinking about Rachel's unease. And my own. Greenville was everything I'd hoped for, but my home life felt like a slow unraveling. That evening, Emily brought up the Carsons again as we sat at the dinner table. I saw Rachel at the boutique today, she said, her tone sharp. She was looking at some ridiculously expensive handbags. Guess some people can't leave their city habits behind. I didn't respond, focusing on cutting my steak. Don't you think it's funny, she continued, how they move here for that simple life, but can't seem to live simply? I think everyone adjusts in their own way, I said carefully, not wanting to fuel the fire. Emily scoffed, pushing her plate away. You always defend people like them. Meanwhile, I'm stuck here, driving a car I hate and living in a house that's falling apart. Our house isn't falling apart, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. And if you hate your car so much, I've already told you, go get a new one. I shouldn't have to do it alone, she snapped. You're my husband, Adam. You're supposed to support me. I've been supporting you, I shot back, unable to keep my frustration in check. But all you ever do is complain. Maybe you should ask yourself what it is you really want. Her face hardened, and she stood abruptly, grabbing her plate and storming into the kitchen. The sound of dishes clattering into the sink echoed through the house. That night, I slept on the couch. The next morning, as I opened the shop, Rachel showed up unexpectedly. She looked more relaxed than the last time I'd seen her, though there was still a guardedness in her demeanor. Good morning, she said, her voice light. I hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all, I replied, putting down my wrench. What can I do for you? She hesitated, glancing at the floor before meeting my gaze. Mark mentioned you were helpful with the generator. I was wondering if you could recommend someone to repair the barn roof. It's been leaking, and I'm not sure who to call. Depends on the damage, I said. If it's just a few shingles, I could probably take a look myself. Her expression softened, relief evident in her eyes. That would be amazing. Thank you. I agreed to stop by the farm that afternoon, and as promised, I found the damage was minor. While I worked, Rachel stayed nearby, making small talk and offering lemonade. She seemed more at ease, her guardedness fading as we talked about everything from Greenville's quirks to the challenges of country living. At one point, she laughed, a genuine, carefree sound that caught me off guard. Sorry, she said, catching my puzzled expression. It's been a while since I felt normal. Moving here hasn't been easy for you, has it? I asked, hammering the last nail into place. She shook her head. It's harder than I thought it would be. Mark loves it here, but I'm not sure I fit in. And I miss having a purpose. Give it time, I said, stepping down from the ladder. Greenville has a way of surprising people. As I packed up my tools, she handed me a mason jar filled with fresh squeezed lemonade. For all your trouble, she said with a small smile. It's no trouble, I replied. Just call if you need anything else. As I drove away, I couldn't help but notice how lighthearted Rachel had seemed, even if only briefly. It made me wonder how two people, Rachel and Emily, could be so different, yet both feel so trapped in their lives. That evening, Emily barely spoke to me, her mood as icy as ever. I found myself staring out the window, thinking about Rachel's laughter and the cracks in my own marriage, both growing louder with each passing day. Over the next few weeks, life continued its uneven rhythm. I focused on work, tinkering with engines and equipment, while Emily found new ways to voice her dissatisfaction. The silence between us often felt heavier than the arguments. Rachel, meanwhile, started appearing in town more often. I'd see her at the market or driving her Audi down Greenville's narrow streets. Each time, she seemed a little more comfortable in her surroundings, though her smile still held a trace of melancholy. One Saturday, as I was finishing up a repair at the shop, Mark Carson walked in again, looking a little more disheveled than usual. "Hey, Adam," he said, forcing a smile. "Got a minute?" "Of course," I replied, wiping my hands on a rag. "What's up?" He hesitated, glancing around the empty shop. "It's Rachel. She's been distant lately. I thought the move would bring us closer, but it feels like we're drifting apart." I leaned against the workbench, unsure how to respond. Transitions like this can be tough. Greenville's a big change for Manhattan. Maybe she just needs more time. Mark nodded, but didn't look convinced. "She's been spending a lot of time at the barn. Says she's cleaning it out, but I think she's just avoiding me." He paused, his voice dropping. "I'm worried about her." I didn't know Mark well enough to offer advice, but his concern was genuine. "If you want, I can stop by sometime. I've done a bit of work on the barn already. Maybe I can check in on her while I'm there." "That would mean a lot," he said, shaking my hand. "Thanks, Adam." Later that afternoon, I drove out to the Carsons' property. The barn doors were open, and Rachel was inside, sweeping out a pile of hay. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore an oversized flannel shirt that looked like it might belong to Mark. "Hey, Rachel," I called out, stepping inside. She turned, startled at first, but then her face softened. "Oh, Adam. Hi. What brings you here?" "Mark mentioned you've been working on the barn," I said casually. "Thought I'd stop by and see if you needed a hand." Her expression thoughtful. "That's kind of him, though I suspect he's worried about me more than the barn." I chuckled. "Maybe a little of both." For the next hour, we worked side by side, clearing out old tools, broken boards, and stacks of forgotten boxes. Among the clutter, Rachel found a dusty record player and a small box of vinyl records. Her face lit up as she pulled out an old jazz album. "Walter Burke must have left these," she said, brushing off the cover. "Do you think it still works?" "Only one way to find out," I said, plugging it into an outlet. To our surprise, the record player hummed to life, and the smooth sound of a saxophone filled the barn. Rachel's eyes sparkled as she set down the broom and started swaying to the music. "You dance?" she asked, holding out her hand. "Not well," I admitted, but I took her hand anyway. We moved awkwardly around the barn, laughing as I stumbled over my feet. For a few minutes, it felt like all the heaviness in our lives had been lifted, replaced by something simple and pure. As the song ended, Rachel stepped back, her smile fading slightly. "Thanks, Adam," she said quietly. "For everything." "Anytime," I replied. I couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel's struggles mirrored my own more than I cared to admit. At home, Emily barely looked up from her phone when I walked in. "You're late," she said flatly. "I was helping someone," I replied, setting my keys on the counter. "Always helping someone," she muttered under her breath. I ignored the jab, pouring myself a glass of water and heading to the living room. The distance between us felt like a canyon, and I didn't know if we'd ever find a way to bridge it. A week later, Rachel called me unexpectedly. "Adam, can you come over? I found something in the barn, and I don't know what to do with it." Curious, I drove out to the farm. When I arrived, she was standing near the barn's back wall, a crowbar in hand. "Did you know there was a false panel here?" she asked, pointing to the wooden boards. "I didn't," I said, stepping closer. "What's behind it?" "That's what I was hoping you could help me figure out." Together, we pried the panel loose, revealing a hidden compartment filled with old papers, photographs, and what looked like a small lockbox. Rachel carefully pulled the items out, her hands trembling slightly. "This must have belonged to Walter Burke," she murmured. Among the papers was a faded journal, its leather cover cracked with age. Rachel flipped through it, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock. "What is it?" I asked. She hesitated, then handed me the journal. Inside were detailed notes about a legal battle involving Walter's land, accusations of fraud, and references to someone named Henry Lawson. "Why would he hide this?" Rachel whispered. "I don't know," I said, glancing at the lockbox. But I think we need to find out. As Rachel opened the lockbox, its contents revealed something neither of us expected. A stack of old deeds, a key, and a map. Whatever secrets Walter Burke had left behind, it was clear they were about to change everything. The discovery in the barn set a chain of events into motion that none of us could have anticipated. Rachel and I spent hours poring over the contents of the lockbox. The old deeds appeared to show ownership of parcels of land surrounding the farm, though many were marked as disputed. The map was even stranger, a hand-drawn sketch that included landmarks from around Greenville, but it led to a spot deep in the woods, far from any marked trails. Rachel's nervous excitement was palpable. Do you think Walter was hiding something? Money? Maybe even gold, she joked, but there was an undercurrent of real curiosity in her voice. Flipping through the journal again. Whatever this Henry Lawson character was up to, it sounds like it wasn't good. Rachel nodded, her gaze fixed on the map. We have to find out what's out there. The next day, I called Mark to let him know about the discovery. He was intrigued, but cautious. Just be careful, he said. I don't want Rachel getting too wrapped up in something dangerous. Rachel, however, was determined. Armed with a map and some supplies, we set out to follow its trail. The path led us deep into the woods behind the farm, where the air was cool and the trees seemed to close in around us. After nearly an hour of hiking, we reached a clearing marked on the map. In the center stood the remnants of an old stone structure, almost entirely reclaimed by nature. This must be it, Rachel said, stepping closer to examine the ruins. We searched the area, brushing away leaves and dirt, until Rachel found something buried near the foundation, a small iron chest. Together, we pried it open, revealing a collection of documents, old photographs, and a weathered revolver. Among the papers was a letter written in Walter's handwriting. To whoever finds this, if you're reading this, you've uncovered a piece of Greenville's history that was meant to be forgotten. Henry Lawson wasn't just a neighbor. He was a man who tried to steal what wasn't his. These papers prove his fraud, but they also reveal something darker. The land he claimed had been used for illegal activities long before I ever farmed it. I kept this hidden to protect my family and this town. Be cautious with what you do next. Rachel's face paled as she read the letter aloud. Illegal activities? What do you think he means? I shook my head, staring at the revolver. Smuggling, maybe. Moonshining. Whatever it was, Walter thought it was dangerous enough to hide. The discovery left us with more questions than answers. Rachel wanted to take the documents to the sheriff, but I hesitated. We don't know what we're walking into, I warned. If someone in town was connected to this, they won't want it coming out. Rachel reluctantly agreed to keep everything quiet for now, though the mystery weighed heavily on both of us. In the days that followed, strange things began happening around the farm. Rachel noticed lights flickering in the barn late at night, and one morning, she found the barn doors ajar despite having locked them the evening before. Mark dismissed her concerns, chalking it up to her imagination, but Rachel wasn't convinced. Rachel called me in a panic. Adam, someone's here. I saw a shadow near the barn, and the dogs are going crazy. I'm on my way, I said, grabbing my jacket and rushing to my truck. When I arrived, the barn was dark, and Rachel was standing on the porch with a flashlight, visibly shaken. Together, we searched the property, but found no sign of anyone. Still, the unease lingered. Do you think it's connected to what we found? She asked, her voice trembling. It's possible, I admitted, but we need to be careful. If someone knows about that chest, they might come back. Rachel's fears proved valid. A few nights later, I received a call from Mark. Rachel's gone, he said, his voice panicked. I got home, and she's not here. Her car is still in the driveway. I didn't hesitate. Grabbing a flashlight and the map, I drove to the farm. Mark was waiting outside, pacing nervously. She wouldn't just leave, he said. Something's wrong. Following a hunch, I checked the map again. There was another location marked, a second clearing deeper in the woods. She might have gone here, I said, showing Mark the map. We set out into the woods, the flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. After nearly an hour of searching, we found Rachel near the second clearing. She was sitting on a fallen log, clutching the revolver from the chest. Rachel, Mark shouted, running to her. What are you doing out here? She looked up, her face pale but resolute. Someone's been following me, she said. I heard them earlier, out here. I thought I could scare them off. Mark and I exchanged worried glances. You shouldn't be out here alone, I said, taking the revolver from her. Let's get back to the house. As we turned to leave, a figure emerged from the shadows, a flashlight in hand. It was Deputy Aaron Mills. Glad I found you, he said, his tone sharp. What the hell are you three doing out here? We could ask you the same thing, I replied, stepping in front of Rachel. Aaron frowned, shining his flashlight on the map in my hand. You've been poking around Walter Burke's old business, haven't you? I warned him this would come back to haunt us. Us? Rachel asked, her voice shaky. Aaron sighed, lowering the flashlight. Walter wasn't the only one keeping secrets. The land he farmed, let's just say it was used for more than growing corn. Some people in this town made a lot of money off it, and they won't appreciate you digging it up. Rachel's face hardened. Are you saying we should just forget about it? I'm saying you need to be careful, Aaron said, his tone grave. Leave the past where it belongs, or someone might decide to make sure you do. In the weeks that followed, Rachel and Mark decided to lock the documents and map away in a safe deposit box, unsure of what to do next. The farm slowly returned to normal, though the sense of unease never fully disappeared. For me, the experience with Rachel reminded me how fragile life could be. It also forced me to confront the fractures in my own life, especially my marriage. Emily and I eventually sat down for a long, overdue conversation, but it was clear we were moving in different directions. We agreed to part ways amicably, with Elwyn staying with me in Greenville. Rachel and I remained friends, though our connection grew deeper as time passed. Together, we continued uncovering pieces of Greenville's history, building a bond that neither of us had expected but both welcomed. In the end, the secrets of Walter Burke's land became part of the town's forgotten lore, a story we carried with us but chose to leave untold.